I hesitated for just a second before picking up the phone, already bracing myself for another unpleasant exchange. Paul often called me at the worst possible times, but this time was different. The lines of worry etched across my face deepened as I answered. "What is it now, Paul? I hate to break it to you, but my girlfriend is pregnant." His voice was flat, emotionless. "She's 18 years younger than me. I guess what I'm saying is, I'm leaving you, Anna. Getting a divorce. That's cool with you, right?" I gripped the phone tighter, the edges digging into my palm. My other hand involuntarily clenched into a fist, an outward display of the inner turmoil I was struggling to suppress. After years of tension and disappointment, I should have been prepared for something like this. But the sheer audacity of his request left me momentarily speechless. Before I could formulate a response, my thoughts were interrupted by a more pressing concern: the well-being of our son, or rather my stepson, Sam. At 16, he would be far from oblivious to the goings-on in our suddenly fractured household. He had always been a sensitive kid, finely attuned to the fault lines of our family. As if on cue, a soft knocking came from the door of the study, the only room I considered mine in the sprawling house that Paul and I shared. "Mom, is everything all right?" It was Sam's voice, tinged with the worry that I had come to recognize all too well. Momentarily neglecting Paul, who was still droning on about something or another, I softened my voice and replied, "I'll be out in a minute, sweetie. Just wrapping up a call." Turning back to the matter at hand, I found my voice. "Listen, Paul, we'll discuss the divorce later. What's most important now is Samantha. If we're going through with this, you need to take responsibility for him. For now, please just let this settle before you do anything else rash." There was a pause on the other end, and then an exasperated sigh. "Anna, don't start with this. He's your kid, too." Technically, he was right, but the unpleasant truth, and perhaps my most powerful card, was still tucked tightly against my chest, a reminder of the complex emotional and legal dynamics that had bound our little family together. The silence on my end seemed to unnerve him, and he blurted out, "You know what? Fine, we'll talk about this later." And with that, he hung up. Releasing a sigh I hadn't realized I was holding, I placed the phone down and pinched the bridge of my nose, an ineffectual attempt to fend off the headache brewing just beneath the surface. Sam was waiting just outside the door when I emerged, his eyes searching mine for an explanation I wasn't yet ready to provide. I mustered a reassuring smile and looped an arm around his shoulders, guiding him back to the living room. "Let's not worry about that call," I said, although we both knew that was a near impossibility. "Why don't you tell me about your day instead?" And as he launched into a story about his latest project in art class, I clung to the normalcy of our conversation like a lifeline, knowing full well that the storm clouds were gathering just beyond the horizon. That night, as the house lay quiet and shadows played against the walls from the street lamps outside, my mind began to drift back in time. The memories came unbidden, a cascade of moments revealing a completely different version of the man I had married. I settled into my armchair, a relic from my pre-Paul days, and let the past unravel itself. I was 27 when I met Paul, an independent marketing expert with a penchant for brand revival. He came to me as a client, but soon became more. We were both rebounding from past relationships. Mine was a tale of young love that burned out too brightly, and his was a marriage wrecked by infidelity. It didn't take long for Paul to sweep me into a whirlwind romance, complete with tender looks and promises of always putting family first. His son, whom he had full custody of, was named Sam. At the tender age of 3, the boy had a mop of curly hair and eyes so wide they seemed to swallow the world around him. Paul would bring him along on our dates, saying, "Just until we find a good sitter." But as time went by, it became an unspoken arrangement, one that didn't bother me as much as I thought it might. Despite my initial reservations, there were fleeting moments where our trio felt like a glimpse of the family life I'd never known I wanted. It was both cozy and exciting, and I began to think that perhaps I could step into this role that the universe had seemingly carved out just for me. So when Paul proposed a year into our relationship, presenting not only a ring but a family unit, I said yes, with hardly a second thought. but the rosy glow of new marriage faded with startling rapidity. As soon as our honeymoon was over, literally and metaphorically, the real Paul began to surface. His facade of a doting father cracked and fell away, leaving behind a man who seemed increasingly indifferent to his son's existence. Work was always his convenient excuse. Even when the underlying note of sadness in Sam's voice couldn't be missed, Paul would shrug it off, leaving me to soothe away the sting of abandonment. I tried to voice my concerns, but Paul's temper flared up easily. "It's not your place," he would say, dismissing my attempts to navigate a healthy dynamic between father and son. As time wore on, I tried to be everything Sam needed, steadfast and present, unlike his father. I attended school plays alone, cheering twice as loud to make up for the space where Paul should have been. And with every small absence, with every unkept promise, a bitter seed of resentment took root in my heart. Now, in the subdued light of my living room, as sleep teased at the edges of my consciousness, I couldn't help but wonder when exactly my marriage had slipped from being a partnership to a performance, and at what point I had lost myself in this charade of family life. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting lines of light and shadow across my face. I took a moment to steel myself for whatever trials the day might bring, after last night's revelations. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the chaos of my thoughts. Sam was still asleep, his door ajar and his breathing steady. I let out a quiet sigh of relief that he could at least find some peace during these turbulent times. The urge to protect him from the incoming storm was visceral, but I could not hide forever behind a facade of calm domesticity. Hesitantly, I revisited the idea of returning to work, part-time at least. It wasn't just about the money, although our family's financial future was uncertain with the looming divorce. It was about regaining a semblance of the independence I had once taken for granted. I remembered my conversation with Paul about this a few years back. "A part-time job?" Paul had scoffed, slouched on the couch with a beer in hand. "What's that for? Some pocket money for shopping?" His laughter still echoed in my mind, a bitter reminder of his condescension. "It's for Sam." I had shot back, my voice firm. "He's growing up, and there are expenses, school supplies, extracurricular activities, and I want to help." Paul's only response had been a shrug before he dimmed the room with the TV's glow. But the next morning, when his head was clearer, he had grudgingly agreed, tossing the declaration at me like it was a breadcrumb. And so I slipped back into a familiar role in the marketing world, but on my own terms. My former boss had welcomed me back with open arms, aware of the tumultuous tide I was navigating at home. The balancing act was taxing, juggling domestic duties with the demands of work, but it provided a lifeline. A reminder that I was more than just someone's cast-off wife. It felt invigorating to reclaim a piece of my identity. That liberation was cut short one evening when my work commitments saw me arriving home later than usual to find Paul pacing in the foyer, a snarl twisting his lips. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I was at my part-time job," I replied, weary and not in the mood for another confrontation. "Meeting some man, right?" He seized my arm, his fingers biting into my skin. "Is that it, Anna? Tell me!" The absurd accusation struck me like a slap. Paul's distrust was a grotesque mirror that reflected his infidelities, not mine. I wrenched my arm away from his grip, denial falling from my lips in heated, vehement waves. But Paul, never one to back down, demanded to see my phone, to delve into the intricacies of a life he so often shunned. I watched frozen as he dialed my boss's number, that single action shattering any facade of trust we might have still shared. I could have drowned in the silence that followed my boss's clear-cut clarification. Paul's lame attempt at an excuse was nothing more than a shrug and a suggestion that I should have been more careful, if only to save him the embarrassment. Since then, my days were colored with a rising dread of future altercations, a dread that had seeped steadily into my heart, setting up residence alongside the growing hollow of my love for Paul. Now, as I sat upright in my armchair, a cup of cold coffee abandoned on the table before me, the inevitability of our situation settled heavily upon my shoulders. We were past the point of repair. The notion of us existed now only in the fragmented memories of a time when I believed in the possibility of a happy ending. As the days slipped by in an unsettled quiet, life took on a stuttering rhythm. I tried to protect Sam from the growing tensions while I navigated the minefield that my marriage had become. I felt a cold knot at the pit of my stomach every time I caught sight of Paul's car parked outside, his comings and goings now as erratic as his moods. One afternoon, my work took me near Paul's corporate office, a swanky high-rise that seemed to scrape the clouds. A familiar, prickling discomfort grew within me as I walked by. Even after all these years, I had never quite come to consider that towering glass monolith as a part of my world. It was Paul's territory, a place where I had little reason or desire to venture until now. As fate would have it, I caught sight of Paul's car parked across the street. There was a figure seated beside him, unmistakable by its youthfulness and the animated gestures that accompanied a fit of laughter between them. With a heavy heart, I realized this must be the younger girlfriend, the one carrying his child. My hands shook with a volatile mix of anger and anxiety as I snapped a picture. I didn't know what I intended to do with it, but the private investigator my friend had mentioned once seemed like a good place to start. Secrecy wasn't something with which I was comfortable, yet the situation seemed to call for it. As the evidence of Paul's duplicity gathered in the hands of the PI, a morbid sense of satisfaction intermingled with my pain. It was ironic how the truth often surfaces when one starts digging in the right places. At home, Sam's obliviousness was a mercy and a curse. The moments we shared, him asking for help with his college applications or discussing his art projects, were pockets of normalcy that kept me anchored. Yet the looming specter of the truth felt heavier by the day. How long could I keep this all from him, and when the time came, how would he view his father, or me? Paul seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, too consumed by his extramarital escapades to notice, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Our interactions were stilted, and more often than not, he wore an expression of annoyance that would crescendo into aggression if pressed. It was during one of these strained conversations that the dam finally broke. Clutching the preliminary report from the PI, I let my gaze harden when I addressed him. "I don't know which is worse," I started, the frost in my voice matching the icy glare I fixed on him. "The fact that you're cheating, or that you were so sloppy about hiding it." Paul's reaction was a bizarre blend of shock and defiance. "What are you talking about, Anna?" "I'm talking about your barely legal mistress and the baby that you claim is yours." I pushed the paper across the table, watching as his eyes darted over the incriminating photos and the sterile, typed-up accounts of his infidelity. The room went dead silent for a second too long before I eventually added, "You're going to need to take better care of Sam. He's your responsibility, Paul." "You can't mean that," Paul retorted weakly. "What about everything we've been through?" I mustered the full force of my resolve when I addressed him, the cut of betrayal slicing through each word. "Because, Paul, as much as I love Sam, I've never legally adopted him. He's not my child, he's yours with your ex-wife." Paul's stunned silence was answer enough. The truth hung between us, an unscalable wall. It was a final acknowledgement of a relationship that had been fraying at the seams long before his affair. In the quiet aftermath, I slipped silently out of the room and made my way to the one place I now considered an asylum, Sam's room. His earnest smile and oblivious chatter were the only consolation I had left in the ever-complicating mess of my married life. Sitting at the kitchen table the next morning, I sipped my tea, staring at the steam curling upwards like wistful spirits seeking escape from their liquid confines. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that seems to press against your ears. A silence ripe with words not yet spoken, truths not yet revealed. There was a knock at the door, solemn and perfunctory. It was Paul, his face a grim mask of confrontation, his jaw twitching with pent-up frustration. In tow was Emma, the young woman whose involvement with my husband had upended my life. Her belly was now showing the early signs of pregnancy, and she moved with the tentative touch of someone navigating new terrain. "Anna," Paul began, "we need to talk." The frigid air between us crackled with tension as I remained silent, nodding slightly for him to continue. With hesitant boldness, Emma spoke up. "I've heard a lot about you. And Sam. He's a good kid, right? You've been parenting him for over a decade." "Indeed," I replied coolly. "Sam is a remarkable young man." Then why abandon him now? Emma's voice wavered slightly, betraying her underlying apprehension. The question stung, but I kept my composure. It's not a matter of want, Emma. Legally speaking, he is not my child. I could see the confusion in her eyes, her furtive glances at Paul searching for reassurance or explanation. Paul, seemingly prepared for a different outcome, appeared lost. But we're married, Anna. Isn't that enough? No, it's not, I said firmly. To make a stepchild one's own, one must legally adopt them. I never did. Adoption? Emma frowned, the concept foreign to her. Exactly, I continued. Without that, I have no claim over Sam, no obligations or rights. Paul's face paled. What does this mean for us, then? It means you're fully responsible for Sam's upbringing. I am not abandoning him, but I cannot, in good legal conscience, take him with me. Your actions have consequences, Paul. There was a pause as the weight of my words settled over us like a shroud. Look, this is a mess, I concluded, standing up. I'm willing to discuss a fair divorce settlement, but Sam's care is not negotiable. He's your son. The conversation ended with Paul's defeatist surrender. Emma's protests were cut short by a simple, yet stern look. They left in a huff, the door closing behind them with a decisive click, the sound echoing the closing chapter of our marriage. It was only after their car was out of sight that I allowed myself a single solitary tear. My grief was not for the loss of Paul, already a ghost in my heart, but for the upheaval that Sam's life was about to undergo. I vowed then and there to protect him as much as I could, no matter the legal ties that bound or separated us. Days passed in a haze of legal consultations and muted emotions. I navigated through them with the determination of someone who knows there's no turning back. Every ring of the phone, every knock on the door, I was braced for another battle, another bitter exchange. In a strange turn of the tide, Paul's inevitable retaliation came not in the form of tantrums or threats, but with him dragging Emma into the sanctity of our home. The tension was thick, a tangible entity as they stood there, a united but unstable front. Anna, Paul began, urgency bordering on desperation clouding his voice. You can't just back out and let everything fall apart because our situation changed. I could only nod, urging him to continue while mentally preparing my counter-argument. I was not going to be swayed by emotional pleas or twisted logic. Emma, her arms protectively cradling her unborn future, found her voice amidst the unease. Surely there's a way you can keep Sam. You were his mother for so long. Her words hung in the air, and I felt a pang of sympathy for her, caught in the crossfire of our crumbling marriage. Emma, I did not abandon Sam. Paul did when he chose to pursue a relationship outside of our marriage. One cannot just discard responsibilities because it's inconvenient, I replied, my voice even but firm. The legality of my relationship with Sam is clear. No formal adoption, no parental rights. It's always been that way. The confusion in Emma's eyes mirrored the same dawning realization I saw in Paul's. It was then I decided to divulge the final nail in their contrived coffin. I retrieved the folder containing the evidence of Emma's infidelity, the product of the private investigator's thorough work. Her breath hitched audibly as she scanned the photos and accompanying reports. This child, I began, placing an incriminating photo of Emma with a man not Paul on the table. It doesn't belong to you, does it, Paul? Silence consumed the room as Paul's gaze fixated on the photograph, slowly twisting from confusion to anger. He rounded on Emma with glaring accusation. Is this true? His voice was barely above a whisper, but each word was laced with betrayal. Emma's stammered denial, negated by the evidence before her eyes, only fueled Paul's fury. You led me on. Paul's words were venomous, his expression an amalgam of rage and hurt. Observing the scene unfold with a detached, academic interest, I felt the chains of my marriage finally slacken. Do what you must with each other. Sam and I will adapt, as we always have. I expect you'll do the same, I uttered with finality, excusing myself from the brewing storm. As I made my way to the haven of my study, their heated exchanges muffled by the closed door, I focused on the sound of my steady breaths and the knowledge that Sam and I would face brighter days ahead. It was not the end of our story, merely the beginning of a new chapter. In the wake of the crumbling illusions and the raw truths laid bare, my thoughts turned toward the future with a steely resolve. It was within the confines of my study, among the legal pads scribbled with thoughts and potential strategies, that I formulated my next steps. A decisive course of action was necessary, both for Sam's well-being and for my emancipation from the life I had known. I reached out to my attorney, a meticulous and forthright woman named Miss Carter, who had been a guardian angel of sorts throughout this ordeal. "It's time to discuss the terms of the divorce and the division of property," I told her over a secure line, each word a hammer driving nails into the coffin of my marriage. Miss Carter assured me she would arrange for us to move forward with pragmatic efficiency, and I trusted her implicitly. Preparing for this legal battle was like bracing for a storm. Security measures were a necessity, not a luxury. Within days, a meeting was orchestrated to discuss the partition of our lives into neatly quantifiable assets and liabilities. Paul's disposition fluctuated between anger and spiteful acquiescence. But through it all, I remained firmly anchored to my objectives. As if play-acting the part of the dutiful wife one last time, I served coffee and brought out the ledger of our once-shared existence, slipping into the uncomfortable but familiar role of his domestic partner. Trying to eke out my dignity from our divide was akin to navigating a boat through rocky shoals, each potential compromise on material possessions a risk that might capsize an already unstable situation. But Sam's future was the lighthouse guiding me. Everything I did was to ensure he would not be left adrift in the wake of our split. Paul hesitated, his expression a mask of consternation as we discussed alimony and the financial stipulations going forward. "How can we possibly unwind everything we've built?" he asked, a note of plea underlying his usual assertiveness. "We can, and we will," I assured him, my tone laced with an undercurrent of fatigue. "It's not just about us anymore." The air grew colder, the silence starker, as we both signed the papers that would render our shared history into nothing more than a transaction, an exchange of worldly goods and bruised promises. I hesitated only once, my pen hovering over the document as the finality of it all settled into my bones. Each stroke of my signature was a release, a liberation from the ties that no longer served me, or Sam. As Paul left, his departure was without the dramatic flourish of our past arguments. Instead, a quiet, anticlimactic exit that allowed the gentle closing of the door to serve as his final goodbye. Retreating to the solace of my solitude, I reflected on what it meant to let go, to relinquish the dreams of what could have been for the reality of what must be. In the quiet aftermath, a newfound sense of pride welled within me. I would steer my destiny with a steady hand, come what may. The jagged edge of reality set in as I sat at my vanity, staring into the mirror at the woman I had become. A woman hardened by betrayal, but not broken by it. With each brushstroke through my hair, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. I was tired of the shadow games and half-truths. It was time to drag everything into the light. Donning my armor of a charcoal business suit that accentuated my newfound resolve, I arrived at Paul's place of work, a towering testament to his professional success and personal failures. Blending into the anonymous flow of the city's morning hustle, I passed through the revolving doors of his corporate fortress with one objective: to ensure there would be no further avoidance or delays in the settlement of our divorce. Paul's supervisor, Mr. Green, was a man I had met but a few times, always in the periphery of company galas and charitable events. His demeanor carried the gravity of someone who understood the weight of his position, and as I sat in the waiting area of his office, I folded my hands, ready to lay out my case. The door to Mr. Green's office opened, and Paul's figure appeared, confusion marring his otherwise stern features. He had clearly been interrupted, pulled from whatever business matters had occupied his day. I could sense his annoyance, but the burning urgency in my gaze was enough to silence whatever complaint he might have vocalized. Mr. Green extended his hand, a practiced smile affixed to his face as he addressed me. "Miss Simmons, what brings you to our office today?" I took a deep breath, framing my thoughts into coherent sentences. The matter at hand is personal, but it has reached a point where I can no longer wait for my soon-to-be ex-husband to do the right thing. Our divorce must proceed, and I need assurance he will cooperate. Paul stiffened, his eyes darting to Mr. Green, then back to me. It was clear he had never anticipated our private discord intersecting with his professional life. "Please understand, Mr. Green, I continued. My visit here is not to scandalize or to seek retribution, but to move forward with transparency and closure. The air between us was charged, the hum of company operations outside Mr. Green's door now a distant murmur. I watched as Mr. Green considered my words, his expression morphing from one of cordiality to concern. I assure you, Mr. Green, I finished, that our personal grievances will not impact Paul's responsibilities here at the company. I am merely seeking resolution so we may both proceed with our lives. Paul's protests were interwoven with pleas for discretion, but the truth couldn't be simpler. We were beyond the point of secrets and saving face. With a nod, Mr. Green assured me he would encourage Paul's cooperation. The meeting adjourned with a heavy finality, leaving me to navigate my way back out into the bustle of the city. As I walked, the gravity of my actions began to sink in. I had walked into the lion's den unflinching, laying bare the truth to the powers that would most impact Paul's decision-making. It wasn't long before news of the scandal made its way through the office grapevine. Paul and Emma's illicit relationship, once shrouded in whispers, was now cast into the unforgiving light of day. Emma's position within the company, intertwined as it was with her personal entanglements, became unmanageable. The fallout was swift and irrevocable for both of them, their reputations tarnished and their professional standing compromised. I returned home to the quiet of my study, allowing myself the brief luxury of unraveled composure. The sky outside was overcast, heavy with unreleased rain, a mirror to my own emotional state. Paul and Emma's fate was no longer my concern. I had severed the ties that bound me to their downfall. It was time for me to focus on the path ahead, to embrace whatever came next, with eyes wide open and heart slowly mending. Now, with the anticipation of an uncertain future tingling at my fingertips, I prepared myself for the next chapter, one that I would author on my own terms. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of change and, unexpectedly, hope. I was offered a full-time position at the marketing firm where I had found solace in part-time work, a lifeline that became a vessel for transformation. Gripping the opportunity with both hands, I dove into the work I loved, allowing it to support and reshape the newfound life that Sam and I were building. Sam was navigating his own changes, adapting to the shifting landscape of our family structure with a maturity beyond his years. Discussions of college applications and plans for the future became our new anchor points as we forged ahead in unison. One evening, as the soft glow of the sunset bathed the living room in warmth, Sam approached me, hesitant yet excited. "Mom," he began, "there's someone I want you to meet. I'm seeing someone, and, well, I think you'll like her." His words touched a tender spot within me. Even as he spoke, he fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "Sam, I'd be delighted to meet her," I assured him, my heart swelling. "But are you sure you're okay with me being there? I mean, after everything." He stopped me with a look, a knowing, reassuring gaze. "Mom, no matter how things ended with Paul, you were always there for me. You're my family. I want you to be part of this." As we shared a warm embrace, I realized that our bonds were indeed stronger than I had ever dared to hope. Sam's resilience and love gave me the strength to be the parent he deserved, regardless of any legal definition. With the official divorce proceedings behind us, my life took on a different rhythm, one filled with promise and productivity. The undertow of loneliness that often accompanied my nights slowly ebbed away, replaced by a sense of peace and fulfillment. Sam's presence was a constant reminder of the continuity of love and care I had provided over the years. Our interactions became less about filling the gaps left by Paul and more about celebrating each milestone, each victory, no matter how small. The college acceptance letter arrived like a beacon of triumph, its crisp white envelope holding so much more than just words. Inside was validation of Sam's talent, determination, and the future he was destined to seize. As he read the contents aloud, his voice crackled with emotion, and I felt my own chest tighten with pride. My own eyes grew misty as he looked up at me, the joy in his face mirrored in my own smile. This was our victory, one made sweeter by the struggles we had overcome. Whatever lay ahead, I knew we would face it together, buoyed by the understanding that family is not merely defined by blood, but by the shared experiences and unconditional support that bonds us. And as Sam set his sights on the horizon, ready to embrace college life and all the challenges it would bring. I stood by, ready to support him as I had always promised, as I would always do. With each passing day, the woman I saw in the mirror grew stronger, surer, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit forged in the fire of adversity and emerging, triumphant and hopeful, into the light of a new beginning. Months melded into a new kind of normalcy, the raw wounds of the past now healing into scars, reminders of battles fought and strength earned. In the solitude of my revitalized life, news of Paul and Emma reached me only in fragments, echoes of the life I had left behind. Through conversations with Mr. Green, whom I had come to regard as an ally in the corporate world, I learned that the once cohesive front Paul and Emma had presented had crumbled into a spectacle of blame and acrimony. The affair, once shrouded in secrecy, was now a specter that haunted their professional and personal lives with equal persistence. Their relationship buckled under the weight of public scrutiny and personal betrayals. Without the security of established careers at Paul's company, they found themselves adrift in a sea of their own making. The court battle over Emma's claims of emotional abuse and her subsequent demands for compensation was a drawn-out affair, leaving them both exposed and vulnerable. In the end, it was not just their careers that suffered a fatal blow, but their relationship too. Emma, still pregnant and now shouldering the disdain of her family, retreated from the public eye and the ire of her once lover. Paul, meanwhile, found himself unemployed at an age where starting over was more of a challenge than a prospect. Reports suggested he eventually settled for a part-time position at a local store, a shadow of his former glory. As these whispers of their struggles reached me, I found myself reflecting not with malice, but with a somber acknowledgement of life's unpredictable tides. There was no joy in their downfall, only the quiet affirmation that every choice leads us down a path of our own making. For Sam and me, the path was one of growth and newfound harmony. As he embarked on his college journey, I watched him navigate his newfound independence with the same resilience and integrity that had seen him through the chaos of our fractured family life. It was a bittersweet farewell when I dropped him off at his dormitory, but one filled with the promise of his bright future. Back in the fortress of my own rebuilding, surrounded by the familiar comforts of a home that had seen too much yet stood resilient, my career flourished. Returning as a full-time employee had reignited a passion that I had thought lost, infusing my days with purpose and fulfillment. In moments of solitude, I would sometimes catch myself marveling at the strength and serenity that had grown from the ashes of my previous life. There was a newfound sense of self that permeated every aspect of my existence, a calm confidence that whispered assurances of the possibilities that lay ahead. In the evenings when the golden glow of sunset bathed my garden in its warm embrace, I would think of Sam's parting words, that regardless of our lack of legal tie, I had always been and would always remain his true parent, in every sense that truly mattered. It was in these quiet moments that I knew the love and bonds we shared transcended all else. Our narrative had been one of trials and transformation, with the final pages yet to be written. Together and yet apart, we moved forward into our separate futures. A son stepping boldly into the world he would shape, and a mother standing proud, her resolve unshaken, ready for whatever chapters were yet to come.